With all the rah-rah and hoopla of Beauden Barrett signing with the Blues, we now know that he also signed with Suntory in Japan. Well, the Auckland outfit will be sans their star signing next year, but only for a season. Bodie's back for the Blues in 2022. Seems like a long way off though, doesn't it? He's the ultimate nomad, our Bodie. The Hurricanes to the Blues to Japan, where he's rumoured to be pocketing cool $1.5 million big ones. Well, Bodie's yet to front on the matter though. His brother Geordie was left to field questions during his press conference for the Hurricanes on Friday. He said Bodie was a little bit busy playing golf, so he'd take the hit for him.
It's probably well played on his behalf. He's enjoying playing golf in Queenstown while I have to front and do his media, so yeah.
Well played, Beauden.
Yeah.
Brotherly love, eh? So who is this good for? He clearly had the sign-off from the Blues, but are they really happy? Are the fans happy? What have they got? Have they got what they wanted? What was it? A playmaker utility back or a star in camp to gee up the troops and get Aucklanders to reignite their love affair with rugby? Well, Leon McDonald's admitted that he'll be a big loss, but that's countered with what he's doing on and off the field this year and that we get him back for 2 more years. So there you go, it's all those things. And guess who's behind it? The director of rugby at Suntory, Eddie Jones. 2020, it just gets better and better, doesn't it? Question. Is Bodie value for money? Does New Zealand rugby or the game globally gain by this? And if Bodie can do it, who's next? Now, you don't deny the players are living and furthering their career, and he's certainly not alone. Think Brady Retallick, think Sam Whitelock, Dan Carter. But it again raises some questions, doesn't it? Bodie, off to Japan. Rate it or hate it?
And that is the massive debate we're going to have here. And this is part of a bigger picture. This is part of the fact that what is the model for contracting of players going forward? We know things have changed. The market, Mills, globally is different. But Mills isn't... Bodie's not the first person to do this. There are a number of players that have done it, and you can't argue with the logic behind it.
No, you certainly can't. And when you look at it, I mean, guys have done it. They haven't done it for as long, and certainly the money hasn't been... you know, as big. I think when they look at it, it's a 4-year cycle. So he's come back, and what they do, you know, and the agents in this occasion, Halo Sport, you know, they look at it in 4 years. He's wanted to stay in New Zealand. He's come out and said that, but you're not going to compete with the money that he's getting offered to move offshore. So in order to capitalise on that, you know, he's obviously come into the Blues, and then he goes away for a year, and he still doesn't make the money that he's going to be offered overseas. And then he comes back for another 2 years and finishes off his contract. The alternative to that is he goes. OK, he goes for that 4 years and we don't see him again. And I think that's where you lose him. You know, you look at the guys like Satutu and Talia, who's just signed, and what he brings, I think those guys are the important guys. Those are the guys that you want to stay here. When we start losing guys like that nice and early, then we're in a bit of trouble.
Look, I think let's put the name Beauden Barrett to one side. Forget about that. All the players need to do it because our game cannot sustain our players playing in New Zealand for the competition money in the Northern Hemisphere. So my argument is, what are we going to do in New Zealand to start giving the franchises, or we need to earn more money to keep them? If they go on this is a financial sabbatical, right? If they go on a sabbatical because they want to have an experience overseas, I get that. But at the end of the day, what do we need to do? Private equity? Private ownership. I mean, Saprit Singh, Bayern Munich gave the Phoenix $1 million as a transfer fee. I mean, are we really professional? Should we be having transfer fees? We need to start thinking about things a wee bit differently because poor old Beauden's going to get it from some part of the public. We all understand it, but people say, oh, he's just got to the Blues and now he's left. But we have to do this to keep our top players. So what do we need to do as a game right now when there's massive change going on to see what we can do to keep him? Is it ownership of the Blues, Mills, where an owner comes in and he can afford to keep him? But that owner needs some exposure to make money out of a franchise, and that's not happening at the moment.
There are 2 different sides to this. There's private ownership, and then there is obviously private equity coming into a game. And they are 2 very different things. And private ownership is when you've got locals, you've got businessmen, you've got individuals, Mills, who are going to come into organisation and they're going to want to invest. But at the moment, we have centralised contracting. Everything is done through New Zealand. And it has led us to win and helped us win a couple of World Cups. But has that model's time passed? Is it time for us to explore other opportunities to try and bring the revenue you're talking about to maybe not have a... And these are guys who left a few years ago, Charles Piatel, Stephen Luatua, who didn't get sabbaticals, they just left. Can we find the revenue to keep everyone here, or is that unrealistic?
Well, I think that's what they've got to find. Do we have the confidence to be able to do that? On the same token, you give, you know, a business, you know, something and ownership, they're going to want everything out of you. So, I mean, our biggest asset has been, you know, we don't play as many games overseas as what they do overseas. They play 30 or 40 odd games, you know, a year. And so if I'm going to invest money into it, if I'm going to buy a franchise, I want these guys playing week in, week out. I don't want them playing 10 games a year. And I think that's where they wouldn't get that money back. You know, if you're only going to play 10 games a year, how long would it be until that sort of goes stale?
Yeah, look, I think Mark Robinson's already said New Zealand open to all options but believes central contracting with the players is still the best option, right? Now, the thing is, what you're talking about, Bills, for me, if you are going to give the franchises some freedom, they also have to have some of the pie. So we have to create competition where they're getting some of the television revenue, some of the sponsorship revenue. By central contracting, all the money's got to go to the New Zealand Rugby Union and then be distributed out. Is that model need to be looked at? Because if you're an owner, and I think, look, the Blues really messed it up with Murray Bolton. He was in for the long run. There was a bit of conflict. They couldn't get on, and so they missed an opportunity because that was our first chance at it. But an owner is going to want something out of it, and it's going to be a return. You can't get in... I mean, the other guys you talk about, Goldie, and there's guys in Wellington who are giving some... They're just donating. You know, they're just great citizens that love our game. But a real investment means I'm in this for the long term, but at the end of the day, I want to be like the Americans and sell the franchise. If I bought it for 10 million, I want to sell it for 40.
And the only way you're going to get that isn't that where private equity comes into, is the fact that someone buys a competition, which we've seen in the Northern Hemisphere, which has happened. You've had people come in and pay for a percentage of a competition and then go on to sell the rights in and around it. Talk about this and you're going, is that where you are going to get the sort of revenue you're talking about? But what are the risks with that, Mills?
Well,
what is the risk when all of a
exactly.
sudden, when you have somebody else in control of a competition that has our players a part of it?
I'll tell you what, the risk is what's happening over in the Northern Hemisphere, where they want to go and play a test match down against us, but your clubs won't release it. Why would I then want to release my players after the season's just finished and then go down and play 4 matches down in New Zealand and then come back and then start a pre-season game where they could possibly get injured? That is where the risk comes in. Now, does New Zealand Rugby have the confidence? Well, then that's in their the ball's in their court. But that's where I feel that you're going to get. You're going to have a real something that's happening over in the Northern Hemisphere where the owners own everything and they own the rights. So are we letting go of the All Blacks? Is that what we're saying here? That's the risk you take.
There's also another option, Mills, and this is why I'm so adamant that the competition needs to change now. Because if we have the Japanese competition on our doorstep with 25 major companies spending $28 million a year on their rugby program, and Beauden goes over there, but he's coming down to play the Blues in a competition, and he's playing well enough, why wouldn't we say, OK, we'll start picking the All Blacks from a competition that is within our region? Our trouble is that our region is our opposition, Australia and South Africa. But if we married Japan and said we want to use that money that's over there, and if Beauden's playing well enough to play there, and Piatel and Luatua, bring it on.
Is one of the challenges the fact that because of the central contracting model, which South Africa, Australia, teams that have won Rugby World Cups recently, most of them, in fact all of them since 2003, in terms of performance, you look at that and you're going, is all of the focus on the top end, on the All Blacks? Is that dangerous? And is that why sometimes we do lose that tier of player? The fact, because you can't reward them the way they probably should be rewarded at Super Rugby level, because their income is pretty much capped. They can sort of get to a couple of $100,000 and then that is it. Now, I know that's a lot of money, but rugby's career is not that long. Is there too much focus on the top tier of players, Mills? The fact that is there too much investment, and do we have to back ourselves to get depth and to create talent?
Well, we've got depth. You know, we've got plenty of talent, and you're absolutely right. That's second, third tier where you can only get limited money, and also to an extent, well, that's why Beauden's gone overseas. We have focused on that top end, and why? Because it's our biggest money earner. You go overseas and the All Black brand and what that provide is our biggest money earner. So why can we actually use that and say, well, we're not going to tour. If we're going to go in privatisation, well, why don't we use that as a weapon? Say, well, we're not going to tour as an All Black. If we get all the owners involved, we won't tour unless we're going to get 50-60% of the gates. And that's the way that we could possibly go ahead and get some monetary.
Back to your argument, Goldie. In football, 20% of the players get 80% of the money. So the top players getting a majority of the money is no different all around the world. The problem, I believe, is our pool's not big enough to keep the top guys and some of those guys that would like to keep for our competition. And that is just a revenue issue, right? So if we do private ownership, then we have to have a pathway to other competitions. If you, like, for example, when you're coaching in Europe and your team, and you would have seen this when you're in Italy, Mills, if Calvisano make the European Cup, they get €1 million to contribute, but it goes to the club. Now, it goes by the union and they take a little clip. They don't keep the whole lot.
That could be all right.
But that's all right. But that's what I'm saying. If we're going to create a competition where our franchises have a pathway, it also they have to get part of the broadcasting deal, the sponsorship deals, and that's where it gets complicated because you would lose a little bit of power over your players. Well, what I'd like to see, just to finish, sorry, Goldie, is that the franchises have the financial ability to keep Beauden with paying him the equivalent that he'd get to go in Japan. That'd be great.
But that costs, and that costs significantly. And they are, all of a sudden, the negotiations and the revenue opportunities a club would need, Mills. All of a sudden, the club itself, it would have the opportunity to negotiate and find revenue and bring it all together. And that in itself, do we believe it's there? Because we don't want to go down that path where all of a sudden we've lost opportunities. And in saying that, one major revenue, you're talking about the All Blacks, could that not turn into 6 if you had 5 working behind the scenes, 5 major franchises working and generating their own income? Does that not support the players' revenue?
Well, it could. And I suppose the next question is, have we got that? Is there ability, and that's probably what the uncertainty about the rugby union is there enough people that are willing to actually back an individual team, our 5 franchise, and be big? Because that's realistically what's got to happen. Someone has got to come in and...
I think there's a market overseas for
the problem is in France, right? So what happened in France is they just signed the biggest television deal in the history of the game, but it was for the owners, right? Because they signed the deal for that particular competition. The downside of that is England's had the greatest football competition for the last 30 years, but they haven't won a World Cup. France rugby, 2 years ago when I was over there, one of their elders was saying, we do not have a Frenchman playing number 8 or number 10, right? So the other risks you're going to take. So is this Beauden decision, oh, we're losing for a year, but hey, actually we're okay? Or do we need to really push the game right now that we've got the opportunity?
I look at it... These are difficult conversations, but we're talking these conversations now, Mills, are the ones that are going to shape the game for the next 10, 20, 30 years in regards to what it looks like. And Dave Rennie's already talked about the fact that he sees Australia and New Zealand needing to come together. It looks as though that they're finding a way to bring... JK, as usual, screwing up his face.
Hang on a minute. Like, I'm screwing my face up and I'm screwing my face up for 2 reasons. Do we have any power on world rugby? Secondly, I love our Australian brothers and sisters, but who needs who?